So we are from Pier 2. We are mostly into staking providers. We are one of the top two providers in rated for Ethereum providers across the globe since inception. We have more than 3 plus 2 billion in staking assets at this point of time. We are also one of the lead node operators in chainlink services. And apart from that, we work closely with Nethermind, providing a light land. So yeah, that will be mostly me. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Nikhil, co-founder and CEO of Predicate. So Predicate is an AVS on EigenLayer, an active validated service. And so what we enable is we enable developers, projects, applications, ecosystems set pre-transaction rules and logic for anything on-chain. So really we call that transaction prerequisites. And the general view here is that you have to be able to set pre-transaction logic for a lot of different types of complexity, right? For user expressivity, for risk management, for AML, for stablecoin minting requirements, for intent systems, any of that type of logic. And so what we enable is the ability to abstract that away. And we work closely actually with Pier 2. They are one of our operators.
Awesome. Thanks, Avi and Nikhil. I think we can get started. So I'm Abhishek from Catalysis. We're building an abstraction layer for restaking protocols. What that really means is it makes it easy for people to build AVSs across multiple restaking protocols, including EigenLayer, Symbiotic, Babylon, and so on. So yeah, to kick off this conversation, I don't know how familiar you are with the shared security ecosystem and what shared security means, but I think a small primer would be great. So in a single sentence or like in a few words, can you describe like what shared security is from your perspective, and then we can really go into the weeds of the questions.
Yeah, so I can probably speak from an AVS standpoint, which might be different.
Yeah, that'd be great. Like from AVS standpoint and from node operator standpoint, that'd be great, yeah.
Yeah, so from an AVS standpoint, it's the ability of having assets to back any action that you're doing to ensure that the action is actually done. So think of it as your security, economic security, to be able to power whatever you're building.
Yeah, to keep it short, I think shared security, as you can already understand, is a base on top of which you can have some roll-ups. So essentially, you can have a wrapper on top of a security layer, so you don't have to worry about your application deployments. For example, what Nikhil just mentioned, they don't care about what they have to build below the stack, so they just care about the application deployment, and the security can be taken care by, let's say, EigenLayer in this situation. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, guys. With that, let's kick off this conversation with the first question. Is that, we have been looking at multiple restaking protocols, coming up. Initially, we had EigenLayer, which really popularized the concept of shared security and restaking in general, like one of the first movers in the space, and then we saw like Symbiotic, Karak, G2, and all the restaking protocols coming up across different chains. So with that, everything like that, do you see this market is going to be like a winner-take-all market where like one restaking protocol will control like most of the AVSs and both the supply and demand, or you think it will like remain fragmented across this ecosystems?
Yeah, sure, I can take it up. I guess at this point of time, it's still too early to talk about restaking in general, as Abhishek correctly mentioned, right? So EigenLayer is essentially leading the pack, but you have competitors standing on board with Symbiotic, Karak, and so on. And then they will be coming up with different services. So first of all, you need to figure out what exactly your product or the service needs, and then deploy that on that sort of a restaking protocol. So at this point of time, it's still too early, but given the historical phase, so for example, just to cite an example, let's say you have different sort of cloud providers existing in market at this point of time, like GCP, AWS, Azure. They, under the hood, provide same sort of managed services. But you still have a market where consumers go and prefer to which cloud provider they want to opt for. So I do believe there will be a need for different sort of services. So there will be fragmentation, but there will surely be leaders who will be coming up in future.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, so there's a technical component of, you'll have, there'll be different kind of purposes for why one might use one restaking platform over another. You can look at lessons from AWS, GCP, Azure, all of those things. The other part is actually there's really good lessons from blockchains, right? L1s and L2s. In the same way that you think about which ecosystems are you collaborating in. And there's also value of, when you are an AWS, when you're an AVS on one restaking platform, you might also invariably collaborate with other AVSs, and you're now aligning security and integration across that platform itself. And so from an ecosystem standpoint, that becomes very valuable. And if we look in most of crypto, you had Keone just speak from Monad, you had Sandeep speak before that. you had Supra speak before that as well. And in all of those cases, right, a big aspect of like is where are you building and who are the developers you're interacting with. And that holds also in restaking as well. And I think we will see more of that. So rather than a winner take all, I think you're going to still have different ecosystems of AVSs and restaking as a result. But you're actually building, I mean, you're having to think about this across different places, right? So
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you raised, both of you, and I really believe that this is something that would definitely have a fragmentation in, because different restaking protocol provide different kind of features, guarantees, would also have a competitive dynamics to it, like how much you have to pay for the economics fee that you're renting from this platform. So end users or AVSs that are renting this economic security prefer to choose the most cost-effective ones, and there's like different features like BTC backed, TIA backed, or like ETH backed restaking protocol. So there's definitely going to be multiple of those. I don't think this will be winner take all, honestly, but definitely this is like going to be oligopoly of stars with like 4 or 5 more competing leaders. And I think from your point, you also mentioned this is very similar to the lessons we can draw from the roll-up space as well. The L2 space, we have ZK rollups and optimistic rollups and so on. So yeah, I think that's how the market's going to be. But yeah, building on that, my next question that we want to talk about is, what do you think about the AVS rewards or the yields, right? Like, will the AVS yields follow a power law distribution? That means concentrating rewards among a few, or will we see more like equitable distribution across platforms? So it's like we'll have some more larger blue chip AVSs that will drive the more revenue, or it's like would be a lot of AVSs driving a lot of revenue.
I'm curious actually on how you guys are thinking about it, because you have to very actively think about that when you're thinking about how you're working across the AVS space and which operators or which AVSs you're supporting as operators.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a cool way of throwing the ball at me. But yeah, it's all good.
Sure.
I think at the end of the day, yeah, there are different AVSs in the market. For example, Ethos, Hyperlink, they're trying to solve interoperability. You have, I mean, Lagrange trying to do really cool things with Light Client off-chain. And then you have recently Infuda has also collaborated, right? So they have been RPC provider services they are solving. And along with that, you also have IGND and Near, all they are just trying to generally solve transmission rates and giving a good gas price, right? So I do believe that there will be different sort of AVSs, but some of them will clearly come out as winners. It's something I'm really personally bullish upon. The reason being, if you see, although it's hugely speculated at this point of time, and it's subsidized, like EigenDA is clearly winning the race for EigenLayer, right? But at the end of the day, you have, you will always see a layer 0 which will come out of Karak, and then a witness chain will also have. Yeah, so this will also be there. So at the end of the day, there will be different AVSs, but there will be some of them where the rewards will be really concentrated upon.
Makes sense. What are your thoughts?
I think it then comes down to risk-adjusted return, right? So you're going to have different forms of return. And so some projects will have much higher variability. And some of that could be because it's much more closely tied to their native token. And then others will have some form of more native yield that could either be stablecoin based or even their underlying asset and fees that are coming out from their system directly. And so if that's the case, I think you start seeing a world of different forms of yield where, yeah, you might have some that are very outsized returns that could be very large, but then other ones that are very stable as well. So I think when we think about our like risk profile, right, is that what we essentially are doing is our system issues signatures for checks. It should be a highly stable form of return. So when we think about risk-adjusted return, it's like, oh, like it can be paid in the native gas asset, it could be paid in our token, whatever that is. It should be very stable. So we see our future as a lower risk a lower risk return, but that also means that we don't have to necessarily pay as high. Other groups might have to pay a very high amount. So then the result here is that I think you'll have a diversity at the end of the day. And you might have some that are very outsized early on as well because they're trying to bootstrap systems. But then they should taper down over time as well. That's kind of how I see the world.
Yeah, I think that really makes sense from my perspective as well, because if you see about the early blockchains or the L1s, the new L1s that have not yet quite gained quite some traction, they tend to have like high inflation rates, like 15% or so, and then those inflations reduces to like a sustainable level, and that's what I think we'll be seeing. And AVS is nothing but like a decentralized, mini decentralized service, right? And that should follow the same kind of principles that we saw for the L1s and the L2s fees and so on. Yeah, that really makes sense. Any other thoughts on that front before I move on? No? Okay, that's great. So yeah, one of the spiciest and most contentious topics in the whole shared security space is slashings. Because without slashings, nothing makes sense. Because if you cannot penalize any malicious behavior, you're not doing anything, right? Like that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't make a robust system. So for the context, EigenLayer, slashings are not live on any restaking protocol. So I think it's on testnet or like in documentation format on EigenLayer. Symbiotic and Babylon are still early stages, so they don't have slashings enabled. But from both AVS perspective, and node operators, and probably LRT perspective, how do you think, with the introduction of slashing mechanism, should reshape this whole dynamics about between all the stakeholders in the restaking ecosystem?
Yeah, this is interesting because when we think of I think even before talking about slashing, we have to first figure out, so why do you want slashing? Right? You should actually start from that standpoint first. And there's a lot of different ways to consider slashing. So what are you really trying to avoid happen? What is the damage if something happens and you don't have slashing? Or if you do have slashing, what are you really trying to account for? And I think this varies project by project. So when we think of the concept of slashing for Predicate, and Lagrange also is taking a similar approach, I think a few other AVSs are as well, even when slashing conditions go up on day one, we won't have slashing in the beginning. And the reason why is because it depends on what is a use case. So for us, if we are doing something, for example, one of our partners is a privacy blockchain, right? And so they're concerned about AML, anti-money laundering, and how do they prevent that? If we have an operator behave maliciously, this is when, yes, you would want to have slashing, right? But in this case, what is the real damage to that blockchain? There might be some, right? They're like, hey, wait, funds just came in that shouldn't have come in. This is a problem. Absolutely. But is that something that completely destroys their entire system? Maybe not, right? So if that's the case, you may not need slashing on day one. Now take someone like an alt layer, right? You have a rollup, and you have a rollup that has to have economic security because if something goes wrong, you need to have that involves people's actual money, right? And so in this case, it really varies on what is a use case you're looking for and what you need slashing. So for us, we won't have slashing on day one. We would incorporate that in the future because as we build out Predicate further, there's other use cases that will require slashing. But for our day one partners that we're currently launching with, there's no need for it.
So what you're saying is essentially slashings is not really relevant for all AVSs. It really depends on the AVS use cases about how they would choose to incorporate and at what levels, like massive slashings or like that kind of thing.
Yeah, because this also goes to that risk-adjusted return, right?
Yeah,
so in our case, if you're working with Pier 2, so in this case, if we say, oh, there's no slashing for these use cases, then in that case, the risk is also much lower, which means that any return that we provide is substantially higher because there's no risk of slashing. So then it really comes down to what are you doing and why do you need it? What are the conditions for your slashing as well?
That's true.
All those things start mattering a lot. So it's like, yeah, slashing is great, you need it. Absolutely. But the level of slashing, what you're specifically incorporating, very much varies on what the use case you're focusing on.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting insight that you shared, Nikhil. We have never thought from that front, like why did we need slashing in the first place? But I totally second that. But to keep it short, I guess EigenLayer at this point of time has no risks, even if you stake. And coming from personal experiences, we have been doing staking and ETH validation for ages now, right? I know that there will be massive unstaking happening the moment you get slashing in place. I'm so bullish on that. I mean, you will see people just unstake their rewards at the same time, and AVSs will be also dominant, playing their role of how much they want to slash. Some of them are going to insane amounts of getting 100% slashed of your reward stakes. I mean, that does make sense when where Nikhil is coming from, right? I mean, it does completely make sense. But you have to understand the risk to reward ratio, right? The more the risk, the greater is the reward also. So if you are being a proper node operator who is making sure you are following compliance regulations, you have proper SLAs in place, you are maintaining latency, you have good computation across the board, then you won't be slashed. As simple as that. So which is a very nice concept. I mean, it's really good. I think so, yeah.
The other thing we haven't talked about either when we talk about slashing is there is the slashing, which is the economic component. But then also depending on who your operators are, there is a reputation component, and certain operators care a lot about that, right? So presumably a Pier 2, if you act maliciously, it's not just an effect on what you do specifically within one AVS such as Predicate. That there are business implications for you as it then relates to your validator work with other groups as well, across not only an eigenlayer, but that also has business implications for you when you're doing work with Chainlink, for example, right? And so that matters a lot when we think about what are the, we only look at the economic implication, but as much as we think of crypto as fully decentralized trustless systems, most of everything we do is actually reputation based, right?
That's right.
We build with people who we trust, even though we say we're building trustless systems. And that really, really matters when it comes to concepts around restaking, which you can't make that fully tangible from an economic and dollar value, but it matters from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Especially from the node operator's perspective, I had the fortunate, I was fortunate to work with a lot of node operators in the past, and from what I understood, it's actually a very, institutional and kind of reputation-heavy business. So that, the more reputation you have, the more people or the more chains that you, people who trust you, the more chains that you validate for. Awesome. Building on that, I think one of the conversations that we are having, earlier at the lunch table was, does it make sense for an AVS to stay in AVS, say once it has reached like PMF or like, that stage where it's like thinking about, so we have these users and we have, sufficient economic security and all those things. Should we just build something or like from my wording, I call it graduation of an AVS. When do you think that AVS in the future graduate? And if so, what would the conditions look like? But I agree that it's already very, very early stages right now. Like every year, the services are just building and stuff like that. But yeah, what are your general thoughts and how do you think the space evolving from that standpoint?
Yeah, for us from an AVS standpoint, I mean, right now we see EigenLayer as highly supportive of our work, so we work closely with them. They are, they continue iterating. They're not, again, when we think of from an ecosystem standpoint, right, they're highly supportive of that type of work. So there's no immediate reason for us to say, oh, we shouldn't use EigenLayer. But thinking of it from a business standpoint, in the long term, if you hit a sufficient scale, then of course you're thinking about, this is a question around vertical integration, right? So right now you're using different platforms to say, okay, I need to simplify whatever I'm building. But as, in any case, as any protocol, as any organization becomes larger, more sophisticated, and you're thinking about more of how to derive economic value, and you're saying, okay, wait, a large portion or a significant portion of whatever fees, whatever revenue that we're generating is also going towards EigenLayer, that is, or any restaking platform, that is a consideration, right? And so then there will be a trade-off. But I think there's also opportunities here for kind of, again, when we think of the ecosystem of a restaking platform, who else are you working with, right? So there's shared security from that aspect. There's revenue sharing things that you can have there. So it becomes a lot more nuanced where it's like, it's not simply just I'm big enough, I'm going to migrate off. It's more, there's a continuum, right? There's a spectrum.
Yep.
And maybe you don't have all of your security tied to a restaking platform. You have some portion of it for whatever reason.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome.
That's a fantastic
First of
point.
all, that's a really good question.
Yep.
And then just on a train of thought that which Nikhil started on his last note, I guess when you become big of a player and you have a proper consumer base for your product, you can come out of AVSs and you can become a huge product of your own. But then, what about the reputation that Nikhil was just mentioning, right? You are sharing a shared security, which is EigenLayer providing or Symbiotic or Karak at this point of time. But are you secure enough? Can you build your layer 2s below that? So that is a bigger problem to solve. So yes, I guess if you can become an Apple, do so. If you are strong and smart enough and you have that sort of resource, you should be there. But then for a lot of other people, it will just be some managed services running on EigenLayer or other restaking protocols. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's still all this other overhead that you have to still do, right? So it's kind of a similar concept of if you're a DApp on a chain and you're like, do we go and launch our own L2 or usually it's an L2, right? And there still is a lot of work you have to do if you're like, oh, I'm going to go launch an L2 now. And the question is, so what is a business reason? Why exactly are you saying, oh, I need to migrate off of a restaking platform? And right now, in the way the world operates today, is probably not a significant reason at the moment, because what a restaking platform lets you do is says, okay, I don't have to think about all these other facets. Let me really focus on what is a problem I want to solve. And that's what you hone in on. And that's the purpose of using restaking. For us, for Predicate, we would have spent a ton of time going and probably using a Cosmos SDK, launching a new chain, and doing all that work, or it would have been a bit like how Axelar approached it. We wouldn't have gone live yet, right? We would be like, oh yeah, I would be talking to you about this and saying, oh, hypothetically, here's what we could be doing.
That's...
So when we think of it from that standpoint, it's still not entirely clear yet.
Yeah, awesome. I think that really makes sense, and I think I don't know how the audience have learned about the Infura product, the decentralized infrastructure network. It was launched in AVS. That was like a centralized. Yeah, probably you can share some more thoughts on that. But it was like a centralized product, probably processing $300 billion of 300 billion requests on a probably daily or like on a monthly basis. And it has it has now switched as an AVS, trying to use restaking for the product. So. So it really makes sense. I think it all makes sense from the AVS perspective and how they think about that. Okay, one of the last questions that we'll be having is, on building on top of the conversation that we're having, do you think we are still in the early stages of the entire ecosystem? Like, and what do you think there are, like, the biggest question that we are facing or like we are encountering today is like, hey, there's like $20 billion of TVL, right, across Eigenlayer, Symbiotic, and Babylon, but there's not enough AVSs. There's like 25 AVSs live. Why do you think that's the reason? Is that because there's not like tooling available, not use cases, or like we're still in early stages? Why do you think there's not enough demand for AVSs so far?
I actually want to get your thoughts on this. You're having to think about that, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I could probably do that, but yeah, I mean, I can start. So from my perspective, it's definitely about we are in the early stages. We have not, there's like total lack of tooling solutions that enables you to abstract the complexities of restaking. There's a lot of unknowns as well, like, and as an AVS, you don't know how much economic security you need, and kind of, how much operators you need, what kind of decentralization do you require. You're not sure about the rewards and slashings and whatnot. So I think it's early stages, and we're already seeing this early 2025 AVSs that are live, and that were live in like in the past 25 months, and like hundreds of AVSs are still in development. So we'll see a lot more being launched in the next 6 months, and then that perception will change. But I think that's how we are doing. We're also working with a couple of AVSs that are like super good, both in the AI space, crypto AI space, in the DeepIn space, and all this new sectors. But they are like starting up, and then they will launch probably in the next 6 months, and then we'll have like more demand. Saying.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a very viable question, right? I mean, why do we see so many less AVSs at this point of time? Just to throw some light on that, I think we are not lacking on AVSs. I think there is already 300 odd AVSs in the Eigenlayers pipeline coming onto that. And then 20 odd of them are already on Eigenlayer itself, right? So you have to have a product market fit at the end of the day. You need to have, first of all, you need to come with a service which actually fits the consumer demand. And that's where I guess Predicate is actually doing a great job. And also you need the smarts of Nikhil. So yeah, you have to have a proper combination of both. But then we do have a lot of opportunity on AVS. AVS is going to change the dynamics like anything on restaking protocol in general. And in order to help people on board, I guess Nikhil can add more light on that. But I guess having some proper modules, having PaaS like platform as service solutions, getting some greater like modularized setups, and then you have proper security guardrails on top of it. You have documentation, best standards, how to build up an AVS, right? That will actually be really helpful for developers who can get some motivation out of it.
Yeah, there's a tooling aspect which, that can always be improved across the space, and it's the same for really building anything in crypto. I also just think, there's a huge pipeline of projects that still have to happen. So one of the things was when we were going live, even before we were going live, we were like, wait, Eigenlayer is launched. They were the first ones. It was like there was this huge amount of economic security that came in, and none of the AVSs were ready basically for that.
Yeah.
None of us were like, oh yeah, we're about to deploy. And that was a conversation we had amongst a bunch of AVSs together. It's like, wait, when are you deploying? This seems like a lot more capital than we were initially expecting. The other part is that innovation takes time, right? So building out new use cases also is something that just takes time to go do the cycles, do the research, figure out where are pain points, identifying where are opportunities for that. So, for us, it was early on, we were focusing on a number of different bridges. And so you said, okay, great, we have those integrations, we can now go through with that. And then as we looked further, it's like, oh wait, now there's other stuff we can do with stablecoin projects. So then we started working with a group like M0 for stablecoin minting structures. And then from there we said, okay, wait, what else can we do? And then it was like, oh, there's actually a ton of work here we can do on intent systems. So then we started working with groups like Kalani and Near for chain abstraction. So then you start realizing that there's more and more you can do, but it's not something that happens overnight. It takes a little bit of time to say, wait, what are we building? What can we build? And you have to actually have those conversations and think deeply about what all you can use the technology for.
I think that's a fantastic point. And from the summary, also, to summarize it, it looks like there's a lot of unknowns in terms of both tooling and kind of what we can build and things like that. That's like kind of say that we are still in early stages. And a lot of AVSs are in development, and so once we have like the bootstrap network of AVSs, and we can really see that okay, this is how we build an AVS, and then like projects like Catalysis is trying to like abstract that thing and kind of standardize the components so that makes it easier to build AVSs and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think so we have covered a lot of ground today, like from talking about AVSs and restaking protocols and kind of how the current situation looks like and how the future looks like. So before we wrap up, I would like to ask each one of you, what's one trend in restaking or shared security that you would be watching very, very closely in the next coming months, let's say next 6 to 12 months, and what would be the most exciting thing for you guys to look at?
Can I start quickly?
Yeah, for sure.
I think reward and slashing, man. We need some money. We as node operators, we have been doing this for ages. We need some money on board or some assets on board to have some motivation across. I guess Eigenlayer is coming up with their testnet reward and slashing protocol in early Q1. And then the moment that gets live, then you see both staking and unstaking happening, right? Some really diligent operators will be getting some good rewards, and then and also I'm bullish on Sriram, the way he has been delivering on his milestones and the roadmap that he has been capturing. So I do believe that it will be a huge thing to go forward. I am pretty much sure that everything will eventually come out on AVSs. Like, it's such a huge platform. Anyone who understands the technology, what restaking protocol is offering at this point of time, it is as simple as that. It's shared security. You don't have to worry about security. All you have to do is just build just an application, right? And then as soon as you have your application, everything is sorted. What easiest thing that you can achieve out of this? Like, you can do anything and everything out of AVSs. So yeah, I will be on that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, rewards is a good one. That definitely has to happen. Another one that hasn't happened yet but starts to get interesting is the ability of having different operators within an AVS have different assets. And so why that gets valuable is as you're doing integrations with different projects between your AVS and some other application, you can actually have your tokens start being aligned across it. You can actually have, when we talk about shared security, it's actually shared security between the AVS, Ethereum if you're using restaked ETH, and that application itself. That gets quite fascinating when you think about token value, you think about revenue sharing structures, and really broadening out this world of shared security beyond simply like, oh, you're not just operating in AVS, you're actually operating a platform that's integrating across the entire space. We haven't seen too much of it yet. We've been exploring it. Nuffle was thinking about it quite a bit. I imagine you guys are as well. But I'm quite intrigued about that in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, awesome. From my take is that I'm not really trying to watch anything, but trying to make it a reality that we will have like 1,000 AVSs in the next 12 months. So that's kind of vision that we are having at Catalysis and North Star that we're having. As you mentioned, like there's like couple hundred of AVSs in development. We're trying to push them forward and make it simply to just build it, man. Like just build the AVS, go with it, and then we will figure out, and we can figure out the rest of things on our side.